Okay, everybody, welcome back to Your Crisis Coach with Scott H. Silverman, that beautiful gentleman over there, and myself, Fred Carroll. How are you today, Mr. Scott?
I'm well today, Fred. I don't have anything but good news for you. I'm sorry. My youngest is here from New York, so it's always nice getting acclimated to that kind of a spring in her personality. You know, we have to kind of take a deep breath every time we listen to her, and she's pretty funny. And she's been here a couple of days. She'll be here till Thursday. And weather's been wonderful here in San Diego. It's 78, nice. And I was out at the jacuzzi the other day and pretending I'm on vacation, and it was nice. My wife and I have been just kind of hanging out, and tonight we have a little dinner, and I'm barbecuing. So keeping it simple and trying to have some fun. How about you, Fred? You had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, first thing I should mention is even with our guests here, that we're not allowed to talk about where we live because it's not fair to me. And it makes me jealous because you get to look at the ocean and I'm landlocked and surrounded by a bunch of rednecks. And it makes me mad, and I get sad, and then I'm depressed, and then I need an intervention. So you guys aren't allowed to, but yeah, my birthday was well. It went well. I'm 57 now. I feel like I'm 37 and I act like I'm 7. So it's in my favor right now, but that could turn on a dime. So I'm not a big birthday guy. I'll take a few phone calls, but I ignored quite a few too because I'm an introvert.
Any other issues you want to cover before we get into our guests?
No, I'm relatively happy, and it's very hot out. It's in the 90s right now. It's too hot here. But yeah, introduce your guests. Let's talk to them.
Well, and we're going to talk about the weather a little bit because these guys, you know, they live in paradise. San Diego is wonderful, but I think Hawaii. A quick story. This guy I know that from Rotary for 30 years was a travel agent, traveled everywhere in the world. And he said whenever he got off a plane in Hawaii and he felt the trade winds on his shoulders, he relaxed in a way that he never experienced anywhere else on the planet, which I thought was interesting. I mean, we went on a honeymoon in Kauai, so I haven't been there in a while, but I think it's a great place. I know it's not easy to live there. And Ken was just telling us about all the problems he's having living in Hawaii, which, you know, it's hard to feel sorry for somebody living in Hawaii. And then another piece you guys got to know is you got to stop doing those interviews with each other with those microphones with a 40-mile-an-hour gust of wind. I have diminished hearing, so I figure if you guys are taking the time, I want to listen, and I listen to that wind, even with those little mufflers on your microphones. But I appreciate what you do, and you keep doing it. So, let me tell you what I know about Ken. Ken, you and I met a long time ago. You may not remember, but yeah, I was running the one-way valet, and we actually stole your car, and you got pissed because you got. Why would I give my keys to these guys? Well, it was one-way valet at that place in Costa Mesa. But I used to hear you speak, and I'd hear you talk about what an adventure interventions are and what they look like. And it was kind of the first time I was hearing from somebody who's really in the industry and been in the industry a long time. And I really I empathize with you, and I thought, what a great tool to have. And I'm now an interventionist experientially, but I do it a lot differently than most interventionists. You know, Louise Stanger's here in our community, so I know her pretty well. And Eric, I don't know if I actually met you, and I'm sure if I met Ken, he probably introduced you, and I forgot. But at my age, I have a little sometimers, and I'm okay with that today. But Ken, I just really respect your work. And then I saw you on LinkedIn again. I thought, you know what? I really would like to see him on the podcast. And I shot you off an email, and you immediately responded, yes, I'd like to do that. And I appreciate that, because a lot of people have just gotten so hoity-toity with their big numbers that they don't want to respond to us. And, you know, we don't have a big audience. We're building it. Our four listeners are still incarcerated, but we know when they get out, they're going to spend a lot of time talking about us. So, and the concept of what we do here is just give people nuggets and what they can do to help their loved ones. And I'm on this campaign of, you know, funeral avoidance. This disease of addiction is taking a lot of lives, and 15% of the country has the issue of addiction. And 15% of the people with the issue are impacting 8 people daily negatively. So That's 85% of our country that has an issue that's going on around people that walk around with untreated trauma and substance abuse issues and self-medication. So what I'd like to do, Ken, if it's okay with you, is just ask you to share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll turn it over to Eric, now that he's fixed his hair and he looks like a body surfer in Hawaii and whatever you want to talk about with the islands, if you do. But I just think that, and before you spend some time talking, would you mind kind of defining your understanding of what an intervention is? We're going to assume that people will see this and go, I've heard about it. And, you get a bunch of loved ones together and you write a note and then the person you love runs out of the room. So what's your definition and probably the industry's definition of what an intervention is? To start us off that way, if you don't mind. Mike's all yours, guys.
Sure. Well, it's good to see you again. I remember that. I remember meeting you and knowing you throughout the years and the good work that you're doing. So that's why I said, absolutely, I'd love to be a part of your podcast because, you're out there helping people and still spreading the message, which is incredible after all these years because we've known each other a long time. But what intervention is for us and me, well, let me start with what it isn't, because so many people get stuck with, I can't do it because they think it's an ambush or they think it's, a way that it's going to embarrass their loved one. And that's not what it is. An intervention is one of the most loving, respectful things that you could ever do for a loved one. If it's done properly and done with respect and done with, the absolutely, you could use them to manipulate to get something that you want when the person isn't really that bad. But 99% of the people that I've worked with, none of them have had that ill intent. It's about saving their lives. It's about being at their wits' end, that they don't know what to do. They're like at a loss. These families are struggling, saying, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? They don't know the answers. And so that's really when they get a hold of us. Like, you do interventions, is they get a hold of us because this is their last straw. They've tried everything else. They're exhausted. They don't know what else to do. But I think I would like to get the message out there. Like, why wait till it's in that type of crisis? It's not necessary to wait for it to get that bad. You've seen the warning signs way earlier on, and you know that it's going in a bad direction. And if you if you picked up the phone and called an interventionist and got the information of what their model is, like you said, every interventionist has a different model, a different type of way of presenting an intervention. So calling a bunch of them and finding out what their model is and finding out how they could help you and getting those answers when you see the red flags. Don't wait until you're in crisis mode. Just don't wait. And, that's I think is the biggest message is, getting the message out there that there is help. And I think, the A&E TV show did a huge, a huge thing to help the community understand. Because I remember when I started the company in 2000, 2001, I would have to explain what an intervention was. Like, people would call and say, a treatment center, how do I get my loved one some help? And I would say, oh, do you know what an intervention is? No, what is that? And I would have to spend time explaining what an intervention is. But I think the biggest message that got out to the world is everybody knows what an intervention is now. But what I think they don't know is that you don't have to wait for crisis. The show always has them in crisis mode when you watch those. But start earlier on and start asking the questions when you see the red flags. I think that's the message that I'd like to get out there today.
So from your perspective, Ken, why do you think people wait? Because I see it all the time. Why in your experience, and you've been doing this long enough, so you have a comparison to when, treatment centers were a little different, but, they're still kind of benefits driven and can be, where treatment centers will probably call you and then work with you to get that client in. But Why do you think families wait? It's amazing, if you or I broke our leg, we wouldn't go on YouTube and try to figure out how to set it. And after 3 or 4 days of listening to our loved ones scream, we maybe we should go to the ER and take Johnny there and get him some help. Why do you think people wait? What's your experience with that?
I think the number one reason is because they think it's going to change, right? They're just sitting there. It's not that bad yet. It's going to change. It's going to get better. And they're just waiting for that change to happen. But as we know, it changes for the worse. It never changes for the better. It's, rarely does it automatically get redirected and back on track to living a normal, productive life. It always, in my experience, has been, even worse crisis, even worse examples that happen. That's when the arrests start happening. That's when the overdoses start happening. And we don't have to wait till then because they're afraid to take the action. And this is one of the biggest things that I see that is harmful for when they're in those modes prior to crisis is they say, if you do this again, I'm going to do this. And they never follow through with that consequence. And when they don't follow through with that consequence, it gives them complete open range to do whatever they want because now they know their loved one isn't going to follow through with what they're saying, and they're not going to, do anything about it. So they just say, screw it, I'm going to do whatever I want. Nothing's going to happen anyway. So I think that's a huge part of why people hold on is they think it's going to change on its own. They threaten these threats that never end up happening. So again, which is harmful for the intervention process. You can't ever make, as we teach doing interventions, you never make an empty threat. If you're going to do something or you say you're going to do something, you need to act on it immediately if they broke that agreement that you made with them to not do it.
Okay. So, Eric, from your perspective, because Ken made it pretty clear that you're the brains in the outfit, and maybe he just owes you money. I don't know. But from your perspective, what's been your experience around, families and intervention and what's worked and maybe what hasn't worked? And then we'll talk about in a few minutes what we can do to help empower the family to, get out of the way, because the client, only suffers from lying and cheating and manipulating and a level of denial. So if we all know that, why can't we pull that trigger, so to speak? And, if we're talking about diabetes, which I like to talk about with families, there is no question. Get them to the doctor, get them assessed, get the blood work done, come up with a plan, and guess what? They can live a normal life the rest of their life. It's not that simple with recovery because you have to deal with all the underlying issues that come up once you remove the anesthesia, but still. So Eric, from your experience, what would you say that Ken probably missed in his explanation? And you know what it is. I could tell in your face. So fill in those gaps.
I was actually going to say he did a really good job. The one thing I do think is that, and this kind of goes along with, I think, the hope that things will get better on their own is the fear and the shame of admitting you have a loved one who's struggling with drugs and alcohol. It can be difficult for people. They want to keep that they want to look good. And if someone's got a really active alcohol and drug issue or mental health issue, you don't really look good, or the perception is you're not going to look good. So I think people are hesitant to ask for help. I think they also don't always know where to look for help. And that's really one of the, like Ken mentioned, one of the great things that the show did was it showed, hey, I don't have to hope for the best in this situation. I can take a more active role. And then the third thing I would say is that, whenever you deal with an enmeshed family system, which every family system is enmeshed, even the healthiest ones without active addiction or active mental health issues, but I think that that enmeshment prevents people because at some level people know, I know what I'm doing isn't helping, but I don't know what else to do, and I want to help my loved one. And that switch of how to enable addiction, which is what people, I think, figure out how to do, and then how to enable recovery is what I talk a lot about with my families. Is that it's kind of like fine tuning, like an old radio in a car. There's a lot of crackle and noise, but if you can fine tune the help, if you can fine tune the support to support recovery, you can affect big change. And I would, you didn't ask me, but I'm gonna jump in about like what's different about interventions today, and our model of intervention. And Ken mentioned this. People have all different kinds of models, and that's we do intervention training. We've been doing them since 2008, where we people who are interested in getting more formal education around how to be an interventionist. Our classroom is actually develop your own intervention model. It's learn about this model, learn about that model, learn about family systems, learn about all these strategies that you can employ, and then take what you find effective and can manage in a system that's helpful to change. And I would say the biggest shift for us in interventions has been our change in the focus on the identified person. We would call them the IP, the person who has the active addiction issue, and more the focus is now family system. Really have to look at what's going on in the family system, because when you pull that person out, the family is still reacting the same way they've always reacted, right? They haven't learned anything. They're not getting treatment. So we really look at not so much how can I help your loved one, but how can I help you create a system of change for your entire family that's going to be long lasting. And I think that might play a little bit into why people wait, is they don't feel like treatment works. And treatment, we as an industry or as a field haven't done a great job of implementing evidence-based approaches that are effective. Most treatments are insurance driven, and they're 14 to 28 days. And I'm sure we could have a whole podcast on the problems with that. I'm sure you have. And, we really believe in like, what does the first year of recovery look like? What are the strategies that we can implement and put into that system to support that system to gain a positive foothold in recovery, so that after a year, they're building on a really strong foundation, rather than, hey, we're going to hope for the best and send him to treatment and hope that he gets it, he or she gets it.
So what I'm hearing is I think what I'm hearing is you guys are talking about the family, because it is a family disease. That's been my experience, and that you're treating the family. And I do all my interventions now virtually, which is really interesting, and it gives me, because I find that the person with the problem seems to be willing, once the family gets them corralled, to get on a Zoom, and then I ask the family to step away, and I basically, what the F are you doing? Your family doesn't want to go to your funeral. And well, it's about money. I said, well, I think a funeral costs more than treatment, and it costs more to get a lawyer for a DUI. So the money thing, and you just told me you gambled $500,000 last year and lost it. So let's don't make the money an issue if we're talking about, you're 45 and you want to extend your life a long time. But I like the idea of you talking about the family, because I think they have to be on board. And I've learned, and I'm sure you have too, that the family doesn't learn and do things differently. They'll just say the same things they've always said. And Ken, if I'm not mistaken, you said something at a luncheon one day, I think it was you, that 75% of the relapses are triggered by family. I don't know if you remembered that or not, but that stuck with me. And I tell that to families all the time. And they go, well, why is it? Well, Johnny comes home from treatment and you want Johnny to go get a job. Well, Johnny's been in this safe, secure environment. And finally, now, unfortunately, he's learned some new tips and tricks. It goes in as a heroin addict and comes out as an alcoholic. It goes in an alcoholic and becomes a methamphetamine addict. But you as a family, there's things that you need to do as well. Well, why should I have to do it when they've got the illness? Well, because if you don't participate in their journey may not change. And that's been my experience. I don't know, but you guys talk about family, so I'm sure it's it. But you remember that, Ken, when you shared that 75% of relapses are caused by family. And this is some, family are the ones you talked about that don't really want to make the phone call. But they're the ones in many ways. I get calls on Fridays, always on Fridays from 3 to 6. Can you come get my son? Well, no, that's kidnapping in the state of California. I can't come get your son, and it's always like, well, because they're coming up to another weekend, and they're going to celebrate with Johnny and his mess for the weekend. But, it's just amazing. And I just talked to a mom who said, I'm having trouble with my son. And I said, how old is he? And she says, 55. And she's 80. And she's had my phone number from a KUSI television spot I did 4 years ago. I said, what took you so long to make the phone call? Well, we really thought we could love him to wellness. I said, oh my God. And then my answer is, well, how'd that working out for you? So she still needs it. And he's not ready, but she is, of course. But anyway, so back to you. Let me throw it over to Fred, because I know he always asks the good questions. I try to do what I can.
Well, what interests me is when I'm thinking of this and I'm thinking of the show Intervention, and when you put it in reality of it, the reality TV side of it is a production, so you got 44 minutes to tell this story. And what everybody watching Intervention always waits for is that end. We want to know what happened at the end. In real life, that doesn't work, but we need to figure out a way where a caption appears over someone. For some reason, we don't care about we care about the person on Intervention because we've invested 40 minutes into him. We're waiting for you to tell us Johnny's okay now, he's been clean, or he disappeared 3 days after you dropped him off, all that. And we feel it. It's part of our lives now. But for some reason, our neighbor who's struggling, we don't care about as much as the guy on Intervention who we've never met. It's weird how TV is you're telling us. Now, we know that's production and we know that's production value. You guys did a great job of holding attention, hitting the high points, hitting the low points. But in real life, it's more than 44 minutes. Sometimes it's 44 years. It's taken this. So it's a struggle with me of what's working and what's not. Does Intervention work, the show wise, to help this, or is it harming it in any way? Does it? And it's just a weird. And I'm in the production business, and I understand grabbing the point of view and grabbing the talking points and stuff. How much control of that did you have?
100%. Like that's what I loved about this company. It's, GRB that produced it wasn't about going in and trying to create chaos and then grabbing that and getting sound bites. It had nothing to do with that. They just said, we are here documenting the truth. That's it. So whatever happened, they would just follow us with what we would do. Like they wouldn't say, hey, try this, or try to stir people up like, they do on Housewives or any of those other reality shows. It's always just following the reality. I mean, Scott knows you do interventions. These things that happen on the TV are reality. These are real live things that happen in everyday interventions, the chaos, the family dynamics. And when you said everybody's sitting there at the very end waiting to see, is he going to make it? Is she going to make it? And if you really dissect it, like if you really start thinking, replay what the family said, right? See if the family was enabling or not. Because what was the percentage I said back then? 70 something percent was because of the family. And it's, if you watch the family's behaviors, the ones that relapse, I think they said they did a follow-up and there was like 50% of the people stayed sober out of the people that did the show. So the other 50%, if you watch the family's behaviors on what they said during the pre-intervention, what they said when they were explaining the person's lives, their loved ones' lives, and you see the patterns, you will see that they had a part in getting them back into their disease because they weren't willing to change. And then there was other ones, like I'll never forget this one. The family did everything we recommended, every single thing we recommended, and everything the treatment center prior to doing the intervention years before. And it still didn't save their loved one. He died and overdosed of addiction. But so my point is that's the 20%, 25%, right? But the other 75% is the family is unwilling to change. And that's what I want people to look for is, are we willing to change? Because it's already known as in the medical community, addiction is a family disease. It's not an individual disease. It's a family disease. It's my, grandfather's brother died in the streets of Puerto Rico of addiction from alcohol. So my grandfather didn't allow any alcohol in his house because he didn't like what it did to his brother. So the point being, it's a family disease, and what the family does and doesn't do to prevent it, because it's in my genes. So even though my mother didn't grow up with alcohol in the house, my dad was a drinker and my mom started drinking. So they were drinkers. But the point being is I had the gene, it was ignited. I became an alcoholic, a drug addict. And because they didn't have the tools, back in the 70s and the 80s, they didn't have the tools to have an awareness to say, oh my God, Ken's going past that line. I was, doing every kind of drug in high school, anything I could get my hands on, but they didn't have the awareness to say, oh, he's past that line. Let's take some action and put some consequences into place, boundaries into place. And people with addiction, we thrive on structure. We don't like it, but we thrive on it. So having that in place and educating families to present the structure that's going to is going to produce recovery. That's really what my interventions are all about. It's not about getting that loved one to treatment. It's about giving the family the awareness. Like, we got to present the structure, we got to create it for them. And then if they implement it, that's when we normally get the good success out of recovery.
Yeah, excellent.
So Eric, you mentioned stigma, and that's probably when people ask, why aren't things, well, a lot of it's the stigma, that it's not a moral failing. And I'm sure you heard it like I have, in my own personal recovery. If you stopped drinking, you wouldn't have a drinking problem. I said, well, if that were true, yeah, but it's not. Unfortunately, I didn't. I was born with that gene. That I'm part of that 15% that has that issue. Just like it's a percentage of people who have diabetes. So, in your experience, where is stigma on a 1 to 10, 10 being the highest level? Do you think stigma has come down over the last couple of years as far as people's awareness and knowing that there's treatment out there? Or are you seeing, well, what do you see with stigma? I mean, from your perspective, what you guys run into, and I think you mentioned it. So would you go with that one, Eric, and just let us know what your experience has been with stigma?
Yeah. And I think, certainly the familiarity or the acceptance that, addiction is a big issue is definitely there in a way it wasn't maybe 15, 20 years ago with the onset of, the difficulties with the overdose epidemic, with the advent of some of the harm reduction models, with kind of the TV show, with seeing addiction kind of out there. But that piece about it's okay for you but not for me really seems to me to still be present. Of course, if someone had an addiction, we wouldn't deny them support, love, feelings. But within their own family system, I still think families have a hard time. Maybe it's not accepting the fact that their loved one has a substance abuse or addiction issue. Maybe it's more about the steps it takes to change that, right? And this is just me off the top of my head. I'm not big into like research and a lot of different things like that. But I get the sense that for families, it's okay for you, but not for me is kind of what we still see at play. They don't want to have addiction. So what that tells me is that the prevalence of stories that make people understand it better are there. Yet there's still that belief that you use the term, I think it was you, about moral failing, that somehow in some way, someone just isn't strong enough to overcome this. Like they should be able to do that. And that's why I love, I'm in personal recovery, and I love when people who are not in recovery or don't have immediate experience with that get to come to meetings like an AA meeting or a 12-step meeting or a peer recovery meeting, because they get to hear people talk about this stuff in a way that is super powerful. Like, I think that, we see some of the smartest, most creative, most able to overcome adversity people who get sober or get into recovery. And it's amazing, and that should be celebrated, right? Hopefully we'll continue to move towards there. And I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's kind of what I would say about that.
It did, Scott. It answered it, but I think like social media plays a role too in all this, and a positive and a negative. Obviously, what we're doing right now is social media, but talking about the subject. But at the same time, families, every parent thinks their kid is the best kid in the world. Or they're going to tell us through Facebook or Instagram, we're not going to see a picture of Johnny's funeral. We're going to see a picture of Johnny's wedding, his graduation day. We don't get to see the in between when Johnny's passed out in the backyard because he couldn't find his key to get in the door and he's drunk again at 16. And they're going to bury that. That gets buried on social media because everybody they're trying to one up their neighbor and their best friend. Everybody's kid is, my kid's going to Harvard. Oh yeah, mine's going to Yale. It's all a game of who's better. And nobody's talking about while the kid's in the backyard, with a crack pipe. It just doesn't get talked about because it's embarrassing. There is a shame still built around it. There's because it's failure on you.
Yep.
If your kid is an addict, you become the failure. And that's not true. We know that. We know that because of how all four of us grew up. My parents had no idea what I was doing. You think they wanted me smoking pot? They didn't know I was smoking pot because I was under the radar. I was the good boy in front of them. I was fooling them. That's not against them, because otherwise you got helicopter parents or up their kids' butt every 24 hours. That doesn't help because then they become adults and then they thrive for that drug or that high because they were eliminated from it at time. It's just the whole.
There's something I think that's shifted though since the opioid crisis and the accidental overdoses, and then of course the COVID time when people were at home is that parents are more scared now than ever. And I think kids are more vulnerable than they've ever been because here in San Diego, there's data, and I'm kind of research data because my second book was called The Opioid Epidemic and spent a lot of time gathering information. And there isn't a lot of it. And most of the stuff the government studies is 3 to 5 years old. So they were so behind the opioid crisis, and because it was Oxycontin being sold at pharmacies that was stolen out of medicine cabinets by kids who, chopped it up. And now it's, according to the San Diego criminal justice, 95% of illicit drugs are laced with fentanyl. The one pill can kill thing. And when I heard the term accidental overdose about 15 years ago, I thought, that's BS. Who accidentally overdoses? To me, it was like, I was taking shooters through my nose and LSD in my tear duct. So how could somebody actually accidentally hurt themselves? Well, fentanyl is a very powerful synthetic opioid, and it's killing people. And the cartels are not going to slow down their production because of the tariffs. They've actually ramped it up, and they're doing more business. But anyway, we're wrapping up time here. So, Ken, tell everybody, even those who don't like you, how do they get a hold of you and Eric? What do they need to do to get the process started? And how can you be of service to them if they want to have the conversation and get it started? What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, well, if you want to stay in your disease and your addiction, you could, as Fred's shirt says, AC/DC, you could go to Highway to Hell. Or I love that song. Or you could take, the Steps and Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin, right?
Right.
I'd rather take the steps, and get to the stairway to heaven and live that lifestyle. But if that's your choice and you want a better life, then intervention911.com. That's our website. It's easy to remember, intervention911.com. Or Ken at intervention911.com is my email address. So either way, they could get a hold of me, or Eric with a C at intervention911.com. So either way, we're here to help and love to help.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'll include that into the show notes so people could click on it and then find you guys where they want, because people do. I'm sure so many people just love that show. You know, that's an addiction. It's a strange addiction, but it's an addiction. That show has become addicting. People just love it and they binge it. They just binge it. I have a roommate who watches it on YouTube, the old ones and stuff, and goes back. And he actually rewatches one so many times that it's like they're his friends, even you being his friend. So, like he talks about you like he knows you, like
I love it.
Your first name basis, Ken, my friend Ken. But
That's funny.
so Scott, you want to give your phone number while you're here?
Yeah, I do. It's area code 619-993-2738. Area code 619-993-2738 or yourcrisiscoach.com. And if you forgot the information that Ken and Eric gave you, call me and I'll get you in touch with them. And let's save lives together and stop going to funerals. I need help. 3 of the hardest words in the English language, but when you say them out loud, whatever you're facing gets 50% easier to move into the solution and away from the problem.
Yep. Well said. Well said. So that's it, Scott. That's going to be it, because I appreciate you guys joining us from Hawaii. That's always nice. Never been there myself. I'll get there though one day. And I appreciate you guys. I think you do a great job, and I think you were great today. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
No problem. Thank you. And this is your crisis coach. And if nobody has told you they love you today, we love you, and we will talk to you again next week.